Tash Talks is brought to you by Recharge, simplifying growth for consumer brands. Hey, it's Tash, and this is Tash Talks, where we dive into the real stories behind success, business, and innovation. Today, I'm joined by Louis Fulcher, the founder of Unearthed, and we're going to be talking about branding, creative, and how these can really change the trajectory of your business. Welcome, Louis.
Thank you for having me.
Now, my very first question, which we've just been discussing off air, and I know the answer and I can't wait to hear more, is let's just start by you telling us something that people don't know about you.
Okay, so I started my career as a rapper.
A rapper?
A rapper.
Like Eminem?
Unfortunately not that interesting. So I actually started my career rapping vehicles, rapping cars. So I don't know if are you familiar with that?
I am, because there's an amazing show with this guy called Yanis. Yeah, you didn't know it for him, did you?
No, but that's what kickstarted my career.
That show?
Watching that guy.
What is that show?
So basically Yanamize, what he...
Yeah, Yanamize, that's it. I mean, it's brilliant. I loved it. I loved it.
And I did. As a 16-year-old lad at sixth form at the time, I was trying to find any way out. I came across his Instagram channel and saw at the time he was sort of rapping supercars. So all the footballers were taking their Lamborghinis into him and he's rapping them in chrome. And
they did amazing jobs.
Seriously cool. Seriously cool. And at the time I thought, that's what I want to do.
I'm not surprised. I watched it as like a 38-year-old mother and thought that's what I want to do. I was thinking, how can I start a car wrapping business? This is incredible.
Yeah. So at the time I was like, oh, wow, that's it. That's what I want to do. And it was almost like a bit of a light bulb moment. And I've always sort of been relatively creative and wanted to do something like that. So at the time I was at sixth form and I was just obsessed with these videos. I was watching them all the time and watching these Lamborghinis. These
How long
Bentleys
ago was this then? I'm trying to think, pinpoint when because he was massive at one point, wasn't he?
Yeah, this would have been 12 years ago now.
Yeah, okay,
Would have been 12 years ago. And like I said, at the time I was like, that's definitely what I want to do. And I live in Norwich, which is quite a sort of small city, quite rural. And you could imagine there's probably not many Lamborghinis flying around the streets of Norwich. So at the time I was trying to figure out a way how I could get into that industry, and obviously sort of moving to London at the time to sort of follow that was probably a little bit too much of a stretch for me. But I tried to see what companies locally were doing a similar thing. So I actually ended up at a sign and graphics company who sort of did sort of vehicle livery and sort of thought sort of, you know, along the similar thing. And actually, instead of wrapping Lamborghinis, we were sticking stickers on the side of Ford Transit, so it wasn't quite the same. And
well, you got to start somewhere.
You have got to start somewhere. And to be honest, we didn't actually progress into wrapping bigger vehicles and eventually sort of wrapping cars. But I think because I had in my head that I was going to be wrapping Lamborghinis and I was putting stickers on Ford Transits, it never really materialised in that sense. So yeah, that sort of led into my sort of career into design as I sort of took a bit of a sidestep. But yeah, that's how I started off.
Well, I understand completely why you would have wanted to either be a rapper like Eminem. I'd understand that as well, to be fair.
Not quite.
Yeah, but rapping vehicles, I can completely see why that would appeal as a career. I mean, what's Yanamize? Is that the name of the program?
Yanamize, yeah.
He's done an incredible job and actually shows incredible creativity in terms of what they do to those cars. Is mind-blowing. So that was your early creativity coming out then?
It was indeed, yeah.
So tell us what you do now and how that moment from thinking about wrapping cars has led to what you do now.
Cool. So I'll give you the long story. Okay. So as I mentioned at the time, I was then sort of doing a lot of the vehicle graphics, they were called. And I was getting quite frustrated of sort of seeing a lot of these designs come through, which were just pretty poor. And like I said, I've always been quite creative, always had a good eye for what things look like, and I knew what good looked like.
Were these like just classic sort of clip art logo type of things?
It was like Dave's Plumbers, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So like by the time it got to us, it was either... it came from a marketing agency or branding agency, so the really nice ones sort of almost came already designed, or people would come to us to design those. But people, you know, going to a signage company to design their branding probably don't really care about their branding. So we found that we're working a lot with sort of one-man bands and a lot of trades. And I felt like I'd hit a bit of a ceiling once I'd stepped into that design role, because I was seeing all of these brilliant designs coming through and wanted to be working on those, but we were more just sort of artworking at the end. So I felt like I needed to sort of move on and try and find a role within like a design agency. So I sent my CV out, went into sort of quite a few sort of design agencies and had a look around, but ultimately I was, I think I was sort of 19 at the time, or 18, 19 at the time, and you know, I didn't have any experience in working in an agency. I didn't have any real experience in design. I wasn't a postgrad, so they couldn't benefit from sort of internships and what have you, and I just couldn't find a role. Completely understandable now, sort of being in the other sort of other side of that.
What,
so
thinking back then to how
Yeah.
you presented yourself and the experience you came with.
yeah, and I was thinking, why can't I get a role? But I was just sending.
Oh, was that
CVs.
tough?
It was frustrating.
Yeah.
It was frustrating, and so I came to sort of the decision of, if I can't get a role, then I'll just go out on my own and just try. So luckily at the time, a friend of mine was sort of almost starting his business as well, doing landscaping, completely different. So I was digging holes during the day and trying to build my business in the evening. And slowly over sort of the course of 6 months, as I was sort of building my freelance sort of pot, if you like, the days I was working on the tools reduced, so I could sort of work full time and haven't looked back from there. So that was sort of how I then moved into freelance.
And did you start with logo design, or did you go into...
I'll be honest, it was a little bit of whatever came my way. I took
Right,
at the time.
okay.
But
I mean, that's a classic
Yeah.
entrepreneurial journey, though.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And do you know, I got busier a lot quicker than what I thought I would. And,
Right.
prices were able to sort of go up and up and up pretty quickly, where I think if I look back at my first project, I think I designed a brand for 150 quid.
A whole brand.
Literally a whole
Yeah.
brand. So, do you know, I think everyone starts off like that, don't they? But, so yeah, came sort of full time in sort of my freelance career. And then found myself in a nice opportunity to almost sort of be a little bit more choosy with the work that was coming in. Brand was always a passion of mine, so I sort of found that I was doing a lot of brand work, and I was able to sort of draw back on the sort of the print design and those other areas that didn't really interest me.
Yeah.
And then COVID came around, and it was a case of everyone needed to be online. So there's this sort of rush of digital transformation, which was massive, sort of 5 years or so ago, and even those businesses who were online, just being online now really wasn't enough. So I sort of moved across sort of from brand to digital, and sort of my skill set sort of spanned brand through to sort of website design and sort of UX and UI design. And I found myself in a nice little spot sort of between those sort of gaps really, and got busier. And then sort of started to accidentally build an agency. And first sort of couple of hires didn't necessarily work out. And I think the reason being was because I was sort of trying to bring sort of people in as apprentices or interns myself, and at that point what I really needed was somebody who was better than me to partner up with and drive the business forward. So
you were quite young when you started.
Yeah.
How old were you when you hired your first person?
22, I think.
Wow, that's really young then.
Yeah.
So you were quite bold in the moves you made. That's one thing I didn't know about you actually, as well as the rapping.
Yeah.
I didn't realise you'd kind of made those moves quite young in terms of hiring other people.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit sort of suck it and see. I was in that point where I was employed but frustrated, and me being me, sort of thought, I must be able to do this better, and there must be a way I can carve out a path, and just went for it really. And it was ballsy, it was brave, but at the time I was living at home, and even if I made £100 that month, it wouldn't have mattered. So I was fortunate to be in a situation where I only had to pay my mum and dad a little bit of rent, and that was it. So yeah, it was I wouldn't necessarily use the term ballsy. It was a different route to take for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all sort of worked out. So after sort of about 2 years of sort of freelancing and sort of trying to build, it wasn't necessarily trying to build, it was almost just I was too busy, so trying to bring in people to support. I met my sort of now ex-co-founder Rich, and he's a sort of global marketing director at a recruitment company or just left. And he was doing a lot of consultancy for businesses. So he'd essentially go in as like a fractional CMO. He'd go in, sort of turn sort of business around sort of within sort of 6 months, build out their marketing function or build out sort of a marketing plan for them and sort of leave them, was sort of his proposition, if you like. Mm-hmm. And what he found was that he was able to go in and do sort of the strategy and do sort of set the tone for the marketing and the direction. But what he didn't have was somebody who could deliver on that creatively. And at the time, I was brilliant at creative, but didn't have that strategy and didn't have the sort of that marketing knowledge, I guess, mm-hmm. if you like. So we got introduced by Jack, who's now our MD. It's all quite incestuous. And we started working together on a few projects. So I'd bring him in, he'd bring me in. And then after sort of 6 months of doing that, it was almost like every project we were working on was in tandem. So I said to him, why don't we, I think he said to me at the time, why don't we just merge and why don't we just do this together? And at the time, I think I was back just to myself and it was him and one other. So we made the decision to merge and spent this sort of next 2 years growing Unearthed into what it is today.
And what is Unearthed today?
So Unearthed today is a branding agency. We're a small sort of we call it boutique size. I'm sure there's a better word for it, but a small team of 6. And what we specialise in is branding. So that sort of spans right from sort of the brand strategy and brand positioning, right through to the execution of sort of the brand activation side of things.
And branding is a word that's often used and sometimes quite difficult to get your head around where it starts and where it ends.
Yeah.
So just talk about that. Like, where does it start and where does it go through to, and why does it matter so much?
Yeah, so I think brand should almost come before everything. And what I mean by that is a lot of the time people think that brand is how you look or your colour palette or your logo, and it really isn't. That's such a small sort of cog in the wheel of what brand actually is. Brand should influence your products. Brand should influence how you talk, how you look, how you feel, your content, the kind of photography you put out, the kind of people that you collaborate with. It should influence all of that, even down to like your studio, how that's kitted out. And what I always try and say to people, your brand isn't, and I sort of revert this back to sort of the vehicle graphics days, your brand isn't necessarily the signage which is on the side of your vehicle. The brand should influence the vehicle itself. It shouldn't be, you should be really sort of particular over everything. And if you actually were to break down what creates your brand, you almost have to think about it as almost like a brick wall. So there's your tone of voice, there's the way there's sort of the way you capture content, there's the kind of people you work. So there's all these different things which ultimately create the wall, and it's not necessarily just your colour palette. It's not how you look. It is literally everything that it should influence every decision you make.
And how many brands do you think understand that? Like, if you're just going to generally say a percentage of brands who understand that versus another percentage who don't really realise how far reaching it is and just think it's about the logo and the colour palette?
I think, honestly, I don't think many people truly understand the depths of brand. Obviously, as you work with bigger brands, there's definitely a better sort of level of understanding that comes with that. But I'd say probably a good sort of 75% still don't truly understand how brand should influence everything.
And what do they think instead?
It is just sort of almost the colouring in department, how you look and sort of what your website looks like, which it really, really isn't.
Do you think the brand guidelines document in somehow enforces that lack of understanding to brands? I mean, I've seen so many brand guidelines documents over the years, and they can go from quite small, like here's our colour palette, this is the logo, use the logo like this, use the logo like that, to huge, extensive Bibles about more of the things you're talking about.
Yeah, it should influence even things like your culture, your employer brand as part of that as well. So obviously the bigger a business, the bigger those sort of brand documents need to be. I think sometimes they are a little bit excessive. I think sometimes people have got the tendency to bloat them out. But really, like the core of your brand is what's most important. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Why are you different? And what we always say is that your brand should position you as the obvious choice. So, for Unearthed, why would people want to work with Unearthed as opposed to any other brand agency? That really is what your brand should do. So whether that's the way you look, whether that's the way you talk, whether that's the way you sound, those kind of things that are relevant to an extent, like they all need to come together to position us as the obvious choice for our customers. We don't need to be for everyone, but for your ideal customer, your brand should do a job of positioning you as the obvious choice.
And what do you think brands get wrong with their brand? So we've got the brands and then the concept of brand. What's the biggest mistake that you see brands get wrong with their branding? Or actually, maybe it's not the branding per se, it's their approach to the concept of branding.
Two things. One is assumption and one is personal preference.
Talk me through those two things.
So a lot of the time, we'll talk about assumptions first. So a lot of the time, businesses will think that their customers will want to see a certain thing, and it may be based on sort of their previous experiences. So when I was at my old place, we did this and customers wanted to see this. Great, but your customers are probably different to the customers you're working with now. So one thing I always say to people is speak to your customers, like understand what your customers want to see, because it may not always be what you're thinking. So I always use an example of like a supplement brand. So this is a story I heard on a podcast. I can't remember where it was. But basically, this person was creating a new supplement brand, and they wanted to source like the highest quality ingredients, the most advanced tech or supplements or whatever they wanted to put into, say, like this protein powder. It was going to be the very best of the very best. And so all of their marketing was around the quality of the product, where it was sourced, why it was sourced that way. And they were sort of targeting it towards sort of professional, so it's sort of busy, sort of people between sort of the ages of sort of 30 to 40, predominantly women, predominantly sort of entrepreneurs. But they didn't care about any of that. They just cared about, is it convenient? Does it mix well? Does it taste well? And as long as they're getting, their 30 grams of protein and their vitamins and minerals or whatever, they didn't care about all of the rest of it. So we're going in at this super high price point, talking about all of these sort of real benefits and drilling right down into the ingredients. People just didn't care. And that's what I mean when I talk about brand. That maybe seems like I'm talking about the product and the ingredients and how they talk about it, but all of that comes from the brand. And the brand, as its foundations, was going to be the ultimate protein brand or the ultimate supplement brand with the most or the best ingredients. People didn't care and they missed the mark. So always speak to your customers and always understand, if you think you're solving a problem, validate it.
People don't like talking to their customers though, do they?
I don't know why.
Why don't they? I mean, you talk to more brands and probably ask them to talk to their customers than I do, but it's almost like they don't think of talking to their customers. What's that about?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's because they don't want to hear what they might not want to hear. Or
do they believe in their own view more than the customer's view?
Potentially, yeah. I think it might be a little bit of that and a little bit of ego as well.
Yeah.
But when we come to create brands, we'll always speak to their customers anyway. And a lot of the time, it does open a few or does raise a few eyebrows, should I say. And I think sometimes it is difficult when you are speaking to a customer of, are they just going to tell me what I want to hear? So sometimes having a third party to ask questions, I think they feel like they can open up a little bit more. But yeah, regardless of the way you do it, you should always speak to your customers.
So the first mistake people make when it comes to their brand is an assumption that they know, either because of their own personal view or because of something they've done in the past for a different brand.
Yeah. Or
they know what's what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly that.
It's really interesting because I think on the growth side of the business, you can take that same view, like I know what to do because I've done this, dozens of times before across different brands. But actually, in terms of driving revenue, it's probably more practical to deploy the tactical actions you've done before than it is creating a brand where the application might not work.
Yeah. Although, like I said, every business is different and every business will have a slight whether it's different position or different customer profile or different angle of things. So, yeah, it's always worth revalidating that, whatever you decide to do.
Great. So number one is assumption, biggest mistake that people make with their brands. Number two?
Personal preference.
Personal preference.
We have to battle with this all the time. So when it comes to creating a brand, like everything that we do, we speak to the customer, we understand where they need to be positioned. Yeah. And what's great about working with somebody like us is we know how to get you there as well. So whether that be we maybe need to tweak your positioning or your messaging or your identity, whatever that may be, we're best positioned to get you there. And a lot of the time, what we find is that we're actually battling a little bit with or subjectivity. So a lot of the time it will be somebody come in and say, I don't really like that font. I prefer a font with it, which is a little bit more swirly. And you're like, great. But that isn't going to position you how you want to be positioned. And a lot of the best branded projects we've done is where we've just got the most trust from the client as well, where they've basically just said, here's where we want to get to. We know what you need to do to get us there, and we're happy to leave you to it. Yes, people will always have preferences. That's why we always sort of go through, a couple of rounds of feedback and whatever. But ultimately, we don't necessarily recommend you do something because it's what I like. I've created some of the most successful brands which I've created are actually ones which I think, if I was to do it exactly how I wanted to do it in terms of my own personal preferences, I probably wouldn't have used that or wouldn't have talked in that kind of tone of voice. But I know that that's right for their business. So yeah, oftentimes, subjectivity can be a bit of a blocker for that as well.
And how do you get around that?
A lot of education. So in terms of like the way we structure things, we'll always start with a workshop, and one of the things that we always talk about is sort of like brand characteristics and sort of brand personality types. And we always see a similar trend where we talk about like the archetypes of a brand and which sort of brand you sort of fall into. And a lot of the time people want to be this, we're this rebellious brand, or we're a jester brand. We want to be funny or bold or out there. And you almost have to remind them, well, actually, the rebel brands out there are your Red Bulls, and they're chucking people out of space.
Yeah.
Your jester brands are like your cereals, like the cereal brand, who are constantly sort of cracking jokes on LinkedIn. If you're to be completely honest with yourself, are you those brands? You're probably not. So you have to take them through that process first, and sort of those little educational points along the way really helps people sort of buy into what you're doing. I think that builds the trust, and allows sort of us to crack on.
God, do you know what? As you're talking, I'm realising how much yours and my brains must be really different, because I'm such a literal person who's, you know, really in the performance marketing and growth side of a business. And some of the stuff you're talking about, I know I couldn't do. Like, I just know I couldn't. How do you take somebody's idea and then turn it into a concept in that way that encompasses all of those things?
Good question. There's probably not a short answer for that, really.
But you have a process that you know they have to go through. But
the process is actually relatively methodical in the way in which we do stuff. So for a new brand, for example, if it's a B2B brand, we'll often take them through what we call the brand benchmark. So it's pitching them up against 4 or 5 of their competitors, speaking to 6 of their ICPs and understanding which one they prefer, why they prefer it, and actually get sort of actual quality feedback. And what that allows us to do is basically go back to them and say, look, out of your competitors, you may think you're better than these, but in the eyes of your customers, they actually think these are way better than you because of this, and your brand is missing the mark because of this. So that straight away highlights at least the issues that we need to tackle when it does then come to rebranding.
So you have to talk to the customers.
Yeah.
That's part of the process.
Yeah.
There's no way of circumnavigating that.
The only time it becomes a little bit more difficult is if we talk to businesses who are truly one of one. So a lot of the time, if we're rebranding an agency, for example, we can pull them up against other agencies.
Yeah.
If we're rebranding a product business which is completely new to market and there's nothing out there like it, then very difficult to compare.
Yeah.
So sometimes you may have to look into different industries or sort of different parallels and take inspiration from that. So there's always that sort of first educational piece, and we always start from sort of the foundations of a brand and build up. So we truly understand what they want to do and where they want to get to, and then we build from there. So there is method to the madness, if you like, but the creativity side is what I always love, and a lot of that does come from inspirations. It is looking at, if they are a real rebel brand, what other rebel brands are out there and what are they doing, and what, it may be we're doing a B2B brand, but we may be able to pull stuff from B2C industry. So looking outside of sort of their own industry is actually a really good place to draw inspiration.
What are some of the projects that you're most proud of and that we might know as the public?
I'll give you a couple. So the first one is Fulfilled, who I know you're aware of, but they are an e-commerce recruitment agency. And the reason I'm really, really proud of that one is because it sort of practices everything that I preach. So I always say, talk to your customer. I always say, your brand isn't just your visual identity. Your brand is your sort of real foundations. And what we did really well with them is we spoke to their customers and understood what the pains were as a recruitment industry as a whole, not necessarily just in e-commerce. And so, we've done a lot of research and we found that there's 2 things which put people off using recruiters or people didn't like. One was the fees, and 2 were the quality of candidates. Those were the 2 things which were sort of restrictions or blockers in the world of recruitment. And understandably, as an agency owner myself, I know that we've hired with recruiters before, and there's always that part of you that feels, if we hired direct, we'd have been able to save that chunk. And
I agree. Even when an agency gets, big, you still feel the hit of the recruitment fees.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really something that you necessarily welcome, is it? No. Although I have actually got my best talent through recruiters that I don't think I would have got otherwise.
They're the devil you know.
Yeah.
Or devil you need, sorry. But so what I was really proud about with those is we actually really influenced their product offering as opposed to just their identity. So their identity is quite, like their tone of voice is quite tongue-in-cheek, they're quite relatable, they're quite down-to-earth, which is quite different to what sort of most recruiters are, and they're quite playful. But we actually introduced a whole new service offering off the back of sort of the brand research and the brand strategy. So one thing that we figured is that people hated the fees, and often it's around 20% average. Some recruiters charge less, some more. But if we're talking about 20%, it's sort of like an average for recruiting fees. We halved it, and it was something that we needed to get Luke on board. Unfortunately, I'm sort of involved sort of behind the scenes as well, so I could influence that a little bit more. But realised that if we were to halve the fees, but people were to pay up front, and they were committed to the recruitment agency, and the recruitment agency were committed to the client, that actually it's a bit of a win-win for everyone. So that was sort of quite nice for us to sort of look back and go, the brand work and the brand research and the strategy and the foundations that we laid didn't necessarily just influence that tone of voice and the way
or the visual look.
It actually influenced the business. And since sort of launching Committed Search, it's been a real success and people have absolutely loved it. And it's actually been better for Fulfilled as well, because they're able to sort of commit people to using those as opposed to contingency, which I won't dive into, but has its issues as well. So that for me was a real nice.
Do you know what I think you did well with that as well, with Fulfilled, is the merch.
Yeah.
I think,
yeah.
Which is kind of obvious, but I really noticed that the Fulfilled team always wear their merch.
Yep.
And
I think Luke sleeps in it.
Maybe he does, but I feel that's really, it's really made a difference to them. And some people think, and I haven't really seen. I mean, obviously, merch is get some merch. It's a word that's bandied around.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it used effectively by a, say, service-based business apart from, or an agency, apart from, say, Fulfilled. And I think it's really interesting because merch really plays into the brand. It definitely means they're present. You can see who's on the Fulfilled team. Some of the American tech partners will sometimes have merchandise baseball caps. And I think, God, it's so interesting. It really works as a brand
easy
point.
win as well, right? And if you're at events and conferences or you're talking on panels and stuff like that, there's so many times that I've been to panel events and I've gone, oh, what's that? That person was really interesting. And you then have to follow up. Who's that person on stage?
Yeah, it does work. It's such a simple thing, isn't it?
So it's little things like that as well, which are just little touch points and just sort of reinforce the brand. So that one for me was quite good in terms of, it really sort of flex what we're all about. The other one for me would have to be McDonald's. So this was actually something that we did a few years ago now, but at the time there was sort of quite a lot of sort of negative press around McDonald's sort of litter laying around sort of small sort of coastal towns in Norfolk, sort of where we're based, and it was becoming a little bit of a problem. And at the time they wanted to sort of open up more branches and what have you as well. So what sort of the franchise, or sort of the Norfolk sort of franchise of McDonald's decided to do was actually to acquire some sort of electric vehicles, which would go around and clean the streets. So not only would they obviously clean McDonald's sort of rubbish, they clean all the rubbish in the streets, and it was positive PR, and it was quite a nice thing. So we got approached just to design some of the vehicles. And
wait, this sounds a bit like your rapping dream come true.
Yeah, it's probably
in a different world.
Probably as close as I'd ever get.
Yeah. So what, they were looking at small electric vehicles,
yes.
like golf caddy type of things. That's
a little bit bigger, yeah.
Right.
So sort of, like, if you imagine like a cross between a golf caddy and a pickup truck,
yeah,
sort of like that, with a cage on the back. Pretty ugly looking things, to be honest.
Yeah, and you just buy that. These are like available vehicles.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they were just going to sort of put McDonald's branding on it and drive around, and they came to me for that. And I think, like I say, as connections I'd made in a previous life, and I saw a bigger opportunity. I was like, we can just, brand these as McDonald's, and
what, like slap the logo on the side,
logo on, paint the cab red, and sort of jobs are good. And
which would have been worked, right? That would have been okay.
Would have done the job. Yeah. But on the back, I just noticed this sort of cage on the back, which is where they're going to sort of store all the rubbish, and I thought that would make the perfect Happy Meal box. So when they sort of briefed it in, I said, leave it with me. I said, I think I've got something we could do a little bit better here, and came back to them with, turned this ugly looking sort of dumper truck thing into a Happy Meal on wheels. And it came up, but the client went ahead with it. That got rolled out across sort of the region, and I still sort of see it driving around now, sort of near to where I live at home, and I sort of see them about. And it's, for me, that was a really nice one. At the time, not a massive project in the grand scheme of things, like in terms of what we're doing, and it's probably not centric to what we do now at all. But I think if somebody said to me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, you'd be working with McDonald's, I think I'd have snapped the hand off. So
I mean, I've been lucky enough to have seen that work that you did, and I agree. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and you must feel incredibly proud of that, because it's very visual. I imagine everyone in the area knows those
I
trucks.
still get pictures now. I've got a good friend of mine, Ollie. He sometimes just sends me pictures of the McDonald's truck, and he's like, "Send it again."
Yeah, I mean, they're driving around,
which is nice to see your sort of work in the real world, really.
I mean, absolutely. One of my businesses is the Notting Hill shopping bag, and they're seen all around the world. And I see them. If I see one, sometimes I've seen them at the airport in Spain, different countries, and you just think, oh, wow. My goodness, isn't that crazy? It's hard not to run after them and say, then what are you going to say? Sometimes I say to people, I designed that, and they think, my God, who's this mad woman who's just approached us in the street? But that's how it feels when you see your work going around.
It is, So that was a nice one as well. Completely different, but those are probably the two I was proud of.
Okay, let's talk about emerging trends in branding then. What do you see coming up and what do people need to be aware of? And I don't actually know where the trends might be in branding. So you tell me, like, what's coming up, what's evolving?
So I actually put a bit of content together this week on this, and one of sort of I'll call it a shorter term trend, is what we're calling like nostalgia. So obviously sort of in the last couple of years with the emergence of AI and with people being able to create content so readily, we've almost found that a lot of brands have almost become quite sterile and really lost sort of their sense of personality and like feeling. Like a lot of the time you look at brands now and they feel quite empty. They may look nice, but there's nothing really beyond just the sort of the visual identity. There's nothing really at the core. And what sort of nostalgia is basically is...
I love the word. Did you come up with it?
Oh, I didn't. I'd love to take credit for it. But what it basically is drawing sort of inspirations back from sort of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s of, you know, when people love to sort of reminisce and think about sort of the good old days. And when you see stuff from back then, it makes you feel something. And there's some brands out there which are doing it really, really well. Burger King's rebrand was a brilliant example, which was a few years ago, where actually they went back to their roots. They went back to the old school Burger King, and people remember that as, you know, the good old days. And what that's really good at is making people feel something. So you'll see it a lot now with especially sort of retailers and sort of B2C brands, where they're leaning more in sort of the grainy images. They're using sort of more nostalgic sort of like filters on pictures. Some of the type they're using now is a little bit more nostalgic, and it's almost got that feel to it. And that's sort of a short-term trend that we've noticed is definitely sort of on the up, and people are leaning into it. And I think it's because people have felt that we've almost lost sense of that sort of emotional touch over the last few years, and we want to get back to, you know, the good old days.
I also think there's a lot of brands that look really good, because there's been a huge explosion in the number of brands on the market as creating a brand has become easier. And a lot of them look nice. So you get a homogenous set of brands where they all look cool because they all look modern and they all have the right color palettes, but they don't necessarily mean anything, because you can easily, loads of brands look great, don't they?
And you see it with copy as well. Probably 5-10 years ago, it'd be so important to make sure that all of your copy on your posts on LinkedIn is formatted correctly and sort of punctual and what have you. But now, actually, because ChatGPT makes sure that everything's so punctual, people are almost going the other way, and people would rather use abbreviations or slang and stuff to almost prove, you know, I've written this, not ChatGPT. It's a similar thing with brands. I think people are trying to move away now from that more refined, polished, because like you say, there should be no excuse for a poor looking brand.
No,
nowadays,
not now. No,
because you could use AI to create a relatively nice looking brand. It may not mean a lot, but it should still look nice.
It will still look nice.
Yeah.
What's another emerging trend in branding?
I think sort of AI in general.
What's happening with AI in the branding industry?
So I don't think brand is at risk of AI yet. I think those who adopt it and use it sort of within the activation, although I say that, I actually don't think we're even there yet in terms of adopting it for AI. I think where AI will really be adopted is when the big players like your Photoshops, your Lightroom really adopt it, and I think then people will naturally adopt it because it's what's in their software that they're using. I think if you're going to go out your way to use things like Midjourney and sort of DALL-E and stuff like that at the moment, it's not really there. But
they're also not easy to use.
They're not easy.
They're really not easy to use. It's almost like it reminds me slightly of building websites. You know, in 2000 and I don't know what year it would have been. 2007, where you could figure it out, but it wasn't easy, right? You had to really focus and you had to really concentrate, and it was hard graft.
And also, you can't get it to do the strategy. You can't get it to do the thinking for you. And those ideas, you need somebody who knows what they're talking about to be able to do that. Where I do think AI will be sort of really beneficial is sort of in platforms like Reloom. So I don't know if you're aware of Reloom, but they're essentially like an AI-powered sort of website building platform, which basically enables people who aren't designers or aren't developers to get to the point of a nicely designed website, and providing that they've got the expertise to be able to put in the right copy and structure the website correctly and what have you. A lot of the grunt work can be handled by AI. So I think moving forwards, I think you're going to see more of those kind of platforms emerge where the grunt work and things like landing pages will just be completely commoditized because people can just spin them up without the need for a developer. But you still need the brains behind that. You still need to be able to direct it, essentially. So yeah, I don't think the strategy itself is you can never say never, but ever really going to be compromised by AI too much. But I think it will play a part in sort of the rollout of stuff a little bit more.
And what's a brand that you'd like to get your hands on and develop to its next level? I'm sure in your role you must look across the market and think, oh, I know what I'd do with that.
Do you know what?
Who have you got your eye on?
I think it would be those household brands which have been around for ages. And we actually did a bit of a public sort of outreach to Coleman's Mustard.
Oh yeah.
So being based in Norwich as well, not many big brands come out of Norwich. Coleman's is one of them.
Wait, didn't Bernard Matthews come out of Norwich as well? The turkey guy.
They did, yeah.
Yeah. Are they still going?
Yeah.
Oh, they are. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the two we've got.
Yeah.
But
Coleman's,
for years and years and years, and they've I think they're acquired by Unilever, and their brand hasn't changed. They haven't done anything with their marketing, and actually they could have a lot of fun with that. So like somebody like that who has been around for ages, there is that nostalgic feeling as well, and that you could really tap into. Somebody like that, I'd love to.
But Coleman's has looked the same. Like
it has.
So is it a risk? Is it a risk to change it, or is it an enhancement?
I think it's an enhancement because you wouldn't necessarily. I wouldn't go in and change it.
Right.
As in change what most people would consider the brand. So
well, change the jar of mustard. The iconic jar of mustard. Yeah.
You wouldn't change the yellow. You'd keep the logo. You'd keep all of that kind of stuff. But what you would really do is when you then see it on, on shelves, or when you see it online, like. That's where you could really ramp up things like the character, the personality, the campaigns that you're putting together. And I think one of the collaborations which we mocked up was with Alan Partridge. So another sort of person.
Quite a lot of things coming out of Norwich.
There's loads.
There's loads.
But we mocked up like quite a fun sort of collaborative campaign with him just to show what you could do. And I think that's where a lot of sort of heritage brands could benefit from a rebrand. I think they're quite nervous because it's like everyone knows Coleman's Mustard, everyone knows the jar, and everyone knows what we look like. That's fine. You don't necessarily need to alter that too much, but there's so much other stuff around that which is your brand, which you could really enhance.
But that's the understanding of brand, where people think it's about something like the jar, the logo, the way. I mean, I've got, I think I've got 3 jars of Coleman's at my house.
Yeah.
So, but it's not.
It's a staple,
more than that. It's more than just the jar and the logo, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that's where you see a lot on. I see a lot on Instagram of people sort of redesigning brands publicly.
Yeah.
And I don't really like it because a lot of the time people go in there and they may redesign Subway's logo, for example. They may redesign a football team's logo, and it may look, or by the laws of design, may or should be more visually appealing. But they've just done that with no research, with no real understanding of what they're trying to do. And a lot of the time they lose that special thing that makes them special.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time, especially when dealing with heritage brands or brands which have been established for a long time, there's a lot of things you have to consider and a lot of nuances. And you see it all the time with like football brands when they try and redesign their crest, their fans just go into like outrage. And it's because those kind of people don't like change. But you don't need to overhaul everything. It's just little tweaks and sort of pushing things.
So Coleman's are a dream client for you.
I'd love to work with Coleman's. Yeah, I really would.
And you did a public campaign.
I did. Yeah, I did.
And you haven't heard from them yet.
No, trying to knock down doors, but I think there's quite a lot of sort of runs to get through there.
I'm sure it's probably a really big business, isn't it?
Yeah.
Coleman's.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, it's part of the Unilever group as well.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think it's a little bit more difficult to get into brands like that.
Okay, so before we wrap up, if your career had a tagline, what would it be?
I think I used it earlier, but suck it and see. Just give it a go. Try it. I think a lot of the time people spend too much time strategizing, which I know sounds a little bit contradictory considering we talked a lot about strategy, but a lot of the time people spend too much time thinking and wondering and trying to make sure things are perfect. But just give it a go, fail fast, and learn and sort of go again is sort of what I would say. So yeah, suck it and see would be the tagline I'd use.
And how can people find out more about you and what should they come to you for? Like, what can you help people with?
Yeah, so one thing that we spoke about a lot today is education around brand and people really not understanding the nuances and exactly what it is. So I talk about that a lot on my LinkedIn. It's been a real sort of focus for me this year is actually I'm not too worried about going viral or not too worried about sort of getting loads of followers, but actually posting valuable content which tries to sort of almost debunk sort of the branding myths and make it a little bit more easier to understand. So yeah, if you want to sort of see what I'm up to there, that's over on my LinkedIn. But yeah, LinkedIn, our website we sort of keep for our own work, so all the sort of latest projects will be uploading on there. But yeah, that's where to find me.
And obviously you've been here on Tash Talks today. Who do you think would be a good guest to come on? Who would you nominate? Coleman's. Head of brand at Coleman's.
Yeah. Somebody from there would be ideal, selfishly. I'd probably say a good friend of mine, Stokely Howard.
Oh, yeah.
So he runs a video agency called Trendy Grandad. Obviously, you know him already. But Stokely's been prioritising his personal brand for a long time. And I know that sort of tail end of last year and the beginning of this year, those guys are absolutely flying. And it's really, really good to see, because I've been behind the scenes and we used to share an office. So I've seen the hard yards, I've seen the work and his sort of relentless work rate for sort of the past 3-4 years. And the fact that they're now sort of really getting places is great to see. So I'd definitely recommend getting him on, and he'd be good value as well.
He is good value, everyone has to take clear.
So yeah. That's probably the nicest thing I said about him. So if you don't mind cutting that bit.
And your final piece of wisdom for brands on their brand, the one takeaway they should take away from hearing you talk.
Speak to your customers.
Speak to your customers.
Speak to your customers.
And if they say to you, I don't want to speak to my customers, I don't need to speak to my customers.
Get somebody else to speak to them for you. Honestly, it's so important. Understand, like I said earlier, I think sometimes people don't want to hear that actually they much prefer their competitors, because I think people naturally do get on their high horse a little bit. And even if we've heard it all before, yeah, but we're better than them. Your customers don't think that, and they don't. You may well be better than your competitor in certain aspects, but if your customers don't understand why that is or what that is, then it's no good to anyone. So yeah, definitely speak to your customers, understand where they pitch you in the market and whether that aligns with where you want to be pitched, essentially.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Louis.
No,
That's so interesting.
Me.
Thank you so much. Tash Talks is brought to you by Recharge, simplifying growth for consumer brands.